Due to the high cost of purchasing a new tractor, the savvy owner purchased a brand new single-axle truck instead, then took it to a modification factory for alteration, transforming the single-axle truck into a semi-trailer tractor. Because converting the single-axle truck into a double-axle tractor requires a longer main beam, the overall length of the main beam is definitely insufficient, it needs to be extended. Now the workers also need to disassemble the steel plate at the end of the skybeam. When modifying such a tractor, it's definitely going to pull a little more weight later on. The original truck's main beam carrying capacity is definitely inadequate. The masters also need to dismantle the crossbeam, and then reinforce the main beam. For such original truck's main beam, which was designed to be lightweight, the steel plates used are also very thin. To reinforce the main beam, first, they have to remove the inner steel plate of the main beam. Because the original truck's main beam has a curvature, now they need to cut the steel plate used for reinforcement, then shape the cut steel plate using machinery, and weld the cut position using electric welding. To prevent rusting of the steel plate in the future, now the workers have to apply a layer of rust-resistant paint on the steel plate. After the paint dries slightly, then they can install the steel plate onto the original truck's main beam. Such manually processed main beam steel plates will inevitably have some deviation from the original truck's main beam. Workers also need to use a large hammer to knock the steel plate into place. Then, the steel plate is fixed with electric welding. For the steel plate used for extension, they also weld it in place using electric welding. For aesthetics and future rust prevention of the steel plate, workers also need to use a grinder to smooth out the welded joints. Once smoothed after grinding, the workers can then apply a layer of rust-resistant paint on it. After reinforcing and extending the skybeam, the workers can now install the crossbeam. First, the workers will use a small hammer, size 40, and a large hammer, size 80, to knock the crossbeam into the appropriate position. When installing the crossbeam, since there is no high-end design drawing, the positioning of these crossbeams is purely based on experience. For the fixation between the crossbeam and the main beam, they also need to drill holes with an electric drill, and then fix them with rivets. Regarding the fixation of rivets, the rivets are also heated with acetylene, then fixed in place using a large hammer, size 80. After ensuring all rivets are securely in place, to make the overall main beam appear more aesthetically pleasing, a filler used for leveling is applied. Since the primary purpose of this modification by the owner was to increase cargo capacity, without considering the truck's maneuverability, the drive axle remains the original one. However, since it's being modified into a dual-axle configuration, the original truck's rear axle suspension bracket cannot be reused. Workers need to dismantle the original truck's steel plates, detach the fixed bracket of the original truck's rear axle, and then weld on the new suspension fixing bracket. To enhance the load carrying capacity and the truck's comfort, this time, a single-point suspension is adopted for the rear axle. Once the balance axle seat and steel plate are installed, now the workers can install the entire truck axle into place. Since the drive axle remains the original, the rearmost axle is definitely not a drive axle. This axle can only serve as a load-bearing axle. Once the rear axle is installed into place, now the workers can hoist the truck's engine and gearbox onto the truck. For such a low-cost modification, the engine and gearbox are definitely from the original truck. This forms a typical situation of overloading a smaller engine for a larger vehicle. Such combinations of power systems often work under high strain, undoubtedly reducing the lifespan of the power system. This situation benefits local traditional repair shops and workshops. Modifying a tractor like this also takes a considerable amount of time. After several days of intensive modifications, this tractor is finally ready. How much do you think such a modified tractor should be priced in rupees?